Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, the event will begin soon. Please kindly mute your microphone for the smooth running of today's event. Please be reminded that a QR code for the attendance of this program will be available in the chat box below in the form of the link. Please fill in the question for the purpose of your e-certification. Thank you. Assalamualaikum and good morning. Welcome back to the second day of virtual conference Next Earth, brought to you by Persatuan Physics University Malaya Perfum. I'm your host for today, Muhammad Irfan, and we will now begin our event for today. Please kindly be reminded to fill in your attendance in the form below in the chat box for your certification. First of all, I would like to invite Brother Muhammad Farihin bin Azman to recite the dua to bless our event for today. As for non-Muslims, let's meditate for a minute. Thank you. Please welcome Brother Farihin.
الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا من خزائن رحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا اشرح لنا صدورنا ويسر لنا أمورنا واحلل عقدة من ألسنتنا يفقه أقوالنا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Amin amin ya rabbal alamin. Thank you, Brother Farihin. Ladies and gentlemen, today we'll have the third session of our conference of Next Earth. But from the perspective of ethics, our session today will be given by Mr. Wan Muhammad Aimran Wan Muhammad Kamil with his topic Do's and Don'ts for Humans in Outer Space. If you have any question, please leave your inquiries in the chat box. We will entertain your question during the Q&A session later. As a reminder, this speech session will be recorded and shared to the audience later for the documentation purposes. Before we begin, I would like to introduce a little bit regarding our speaker's background. Mr. Wan Muhammad Aimran Wan Muhammad Kamil is an astronomy and astrophysics lecturer from the Department of Physics of Science Faculty of University Kebangsaan Malaysia UKM. He received his bachelor's degree in physics with honours from the Imperial College London and later on another bachelor's degrees in astrophysics from the University College London. Mr. Wan Muhammad Aimran played an active role in grooming local high school and pre-university students for the International Physics Olympiad (IPHO) since 2010. He is also actively involved with astronomy and astrophysics research and education among the students in Permata Pintar National Gifted Centre of UKM, especially in its observatory since its opening in 2013. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Wan Muhammad Aimran to deliver his speech. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting me to give this particular talk. It is a wonderful opportunity to discuss this particular issue. I know that Sunday morning is probably not the best time to discuss ethics or morality, but I'm very grateful for all of you who have chosen to attend. Right. So first of all, I would like to just say from the very beginning that whenever we talk about ethics or morality, at least in this presentation, it is not so much to give answers Of course, ethics is about deciding what is right and what is wrong. But throughout this presentation, what I hope I would do is not so much to tell you, a list of rules or a list of good conduct or bad conduct that we should do once we are in space, but to help all of us, or to help you think through the answers of the do's and don'ts for human beings in outer space, right? That is the most exciting thing about ethics and about philosophy, that we get to exercise our intellect and our minds to arrive at a reasonable answer, right? So by the end of this presentation, what I hope all of us will get is you will realize that human presence in outer space, or human exploration of outer space, is not just a question of whether we can go into space or not. It's not just a technological problem of how to do it and where to go, but more importantly, it is also an ethical issue, in the sense that whether we should go at all or not, right? If you realize that, if by the end of this presentation you realize that this question of going to space, or this issue of going to space, also has an ethical or moral dimension, that is good enough for me, right? So that is the aim for this presentation. I'm going to share my materials. I'm going to do it in two ways. First, I'm going to share the screen, but I'm also going to share the link to the materials in the chat section, so you can just open it and review it as we go along, right? So let me just share this thing, and then let me just screen share. Now I have to click, right? Let me just put it full screen, so that's easy. Right. So what should be on your screen is a mind map, right? And the mind map features all the main points that we are going to discuss for the next maybe 45 minutes or 50 minutes, right? If you can't see it, if for some reason you can't see it, you can also click the link in the chat section. It's the same materials, right? So you can just open it on your laptop or on your computer, right? So let me just begin by drawing your attention to this. This is a report produced by the United States Air Force about an experiment which they proposed to be done on the moon. This report, this experiment was conducted 1 year after the launch of Sputnik, which was the first man-made satellite. So this is 1 year after Malaysia gains independence, just to give some context. So what this experiment was about was it proposed detonating a nuclear bomb on the moon, right? So this was a proposal, right, to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. There were two reasons. First, to study the geological structure of the moon, because if you produce an explosion on the moon, and then you study how the surface of the moon reacted to the explosion, right? Reacted to the shock wave for the explosion, then that tells you something about the internal geology of the moon. Just like how geologists on Earth study the internal structure of the Earth by studying, the propagation of seismic waves through the structure of the Earth. So this is all along the same principles, right? The first purpose is to study to collect information about the internal structure of the moon, right? So that was the first purpose. The second purpose is much more political and much more ideological. You must understand that in the 1950s and 1960s, the United States is in the race with the Soviet Union to send the first man to space, to send the first man to the moon, right? So the military leaders who proposed this particular experiment thought that, well, if they can detonate a nuclear explosion or nuclear bomb on the moon, then the site or the appearance or the image of that explosion could be seen from Earth, right? And that will be seen as a demonstration of American military prowess. So it is. So the experiment was also meant to be a demonstration of what the United States can do, right? So by doing so, then they can boost the morale of the Americans and strike fear in the in the hearts of the Russians or the Soviet Union, right? So the reason I brought this particular document or this particular experiment up was if we were to do this again, right? If somebody were to propose detonating a nuclear bomb on the moon today, I think there would be instant shock and maybe opposition to it, right? But when this was proposed, they have no idea of whether there's anything living on the moon, right? So on the one hand, you can understand why they chose the moon. One, because everyone can see it. Two, because according to them, it is lifeless. So even if there's an explosion, there's no harm to anyone, right? Another point about this particular experiment was one of the person who was involved in this experiment was a young astronomer called Carl Sagan. Right? He was involved in the planning team for this. Right? This particular experiment was only known to the public, I think 50 years, so I think a few years ago, right? Because these are classified documents, and it took 50 years before it can be released to the public. So this was known or this was released like 10 years ago, right? The idea that we can put or we can send weapons into space raises an interesting ethical problem, right? Of course, technologically we can do it, right? We have the means to do it, but then the next question is whether we ought to do it, right? And as soon as we begin to ask about whether we should do something or we ought to do something, then we are in the realm of ethics, right? This is an example of the ethical issues that we have to face whenever we talk about sending man into space or about having human presence in space, right? As a side note, you'll be glad to know that this experiment, even though it was proposed, but it was never conducted, right? Because they thought that the consequences would be too great, and the opposition by the public would be too great. So in the end, they abandoned the experiment. But it is interesting that they thought of even proposing this experiment, right? Sending nuclear weapons to the moon and detonating it there. Today, if this were done, this would constitute like an act of war, right? But back then, during the Cold War, this is typical, right, of the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Okay, so if you want to find more information about this, then you can just click this link here. This project is called Project A11. Project A119, a study of lunar research flights, right? So this was in 1958. Okay, so I'm going to structure my presentation into three parts. The first part is to try to situate where, when we talk about ethics of space travel or ethics of humans in space, the first thing I want to do is to let you guys know where does this particular question fit into the other questions or into the other issues that you have listened to yesterday, right? With Dr. Juan Carlos, you talk about how to travel in space, right? How to get somewhere. With Dr. Kuhan, you talked about whether there are life forms in space. You talk about astrobiology. So in the first part, of this presentation, I just want to give you some sense of where does the question of ethics sort of fit into these two other questions about how to get somewhere into space and whether there's life in space. So that's the first thing I want to do here, right? And then once we know where ethics is, where the question of ethics is in relation to the question about science and technology, the next thing I want to do is to just give you a brief overview of the ethical issues that arises when we talk about human exploration or human presence in space, right? We are going to do this very briefly, but what I hope to do here is to give you a flavor of the kind of ethical research that that we are doing when it comes to human space exploration. And then finally, I want to convince you or persuade you why do we need to think about these ethical issues of human presence in space. I think the caption, or rather the description for this particular talk, I think by the organizer is that I read somewhere that they say that this presentation is like a dessert. It's like the end of it's tasty and it is at the end of the long meal which started yesterday, right? But what I want to convince you is that if we are not clear, or if we don't settle as long as we don't settle the question of whether we should go into space, the question of how to go into space and where do we go into space becomes not say meaningless, but it becomes it becomes secondary, right? The first thing we should ask ourselves is whether we should go into space. Then only we should start thinking about how to go into space and where to go in space, right? So the proper order is to settle the ethical and moral issues first, and then you settle the scientific and technological issues. And then finally, just some takeaway points. I will try to summarize the presentation, right? So let us begin with the first part of this presentation. So let me just close whatever's not important. So let's go here, right? How should we think about ethical issues of human exploration of space, right? So if you see here, I have arranged when we talk about sending humans into space, there are basically there's a hierarchy of problems, right? We have to settle. There's a first tier, the second tier, and the third tier, right? The first tier problems are, to me, amongst the easiest to tackle. And the first tier problems are basically scientific problems. We want to know what is out there in space, right? And we want to also know if we human beings were to go into space, then can we survive out there, right? So under what is out there, then this includes the study of planets in our own solar system and exoplanets orbiting other stars, right? The study of asteroids, and also the study of objects that is in the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud is these are objects that is located beyond the orbit of Neptune and Pluto, right? So the difference between the objects in the Oort cloud and the asteroids are mainly iron and rocks, whereas the Oort cloud objects are usually ice, basically ice, condensed ice and gases, right? And then finally, we also study stars, right? And the reason I chose these particular objects is because these objects are the objects that astronomers have considered the possibility of humans settling on them, right? So if you read about proposal for human presence in space, they talk a lot about sending humans to other planets, or sending humans to other planets orbiting other stars. They also talk about establishing colonies on asteroids for mining them. Some of them talked about putting a space station amongst the Oort cloud. Carl Sagan was one of the first person to sort of propose this. And then some astronomers have proposed that instead of limiting ourselves to settling on other planets or on asteroids, we should also consider building space station around other stars, right? So building Dyson spheres, for instance, right? So you build a space station that can harness the energy of stars, right? So these are the possible, the potential habitats for humans in space, and the properties of these objects are supplied to us through astronomical and astrophysical research, right? So this is where all the work by the astronomers and the astrophysicists are important to tell us where we can go in space, right? Where we can go and where we should not go, right? And then there's also this issue of can we, as human beings, survive in space, right? So this is a field of space biology, right? And this is why we like to send biological samples to the International Space Station, for instance, right? I think Dr. Cohen spoke about, how Malaysia, how as part of the Angkasawan uh, project, we have sent biological samples, tissues to the International Space Station to see the effects of microgravity, of exposure to space radiation. So the purpose of all those experiments in space biology is to study the short-term and long-term effects of being in space on biological organisms, right? So this is space biology, right? This is different from astrobiology, right? Astrobiology is to look for life in space. Space biology is the study of whether we as biological organisms can survive in space, and not just human beings, also plants and animals, because once humans go into space, we still need to eat, so we need to find a way to farm in space, right? So we need to know how plants will adapt and survive in space, right? If we want to eat kangkong in space, then we need to know whether kangkong can survive when farmed in space, right? So all of that is under space biology. Okay, so these two problems, these are the first tier problems. These are scientific problems which can be easily solved. You can think of the experiment, and then you can just, you can collect the data, and then you can present your findings. These are, to my mind at least, these are quite easy to tackle. The second tier problems are technological problems, right? How do you go out there? How do we get into space? And then once we get to space, how do we remain out there, right? So to the question of how do we get out there, this is the topic of Dr. Juan's talk yesterday, right? How to get to Alpha Centauri. Mainly, when we talk about getting to space or getting somewhere in space, usually the methods can be divided into two. One, whether you want to travel faster than light, right? Wormholes or warp drives or whatever, right? Or you are content with traveling slower than light, right? This would be using ion drive or solar sails or even generation ships, right? It means that you send people, but you put them to sleep, and then you let them sleep throughout the journey, and then once they arrive at the destination, then you wake them up, right? So I think you can I think if you recall the films and the television series on space travel, I think there are many variations of these two methods, right? Of space travel, either faster than light or slower than light. Okay. Once we manage to get out into space, then the question becomes of how do we remain? How do we how do we build our habitats in space, right? Whether we, for instance, if we have landed, or if we have successfully landed on Mars, right? Then we need to find a way to build our house or our home, really, on Martian soil, right? So this is a question of human settlements. How do we build, or how do we construct human settlements, right? And into this, a lot of engineers, material scientists are involved in this, right? Because you need to think about what kind of materials should you use to build human settlements on other planets, right? And I would just like to draw your attention to this particular news report. Hang on. This was a news report in Cosmo. This is a local newspaper. This was, I think, last week, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite interesting. It talked about a proposal by an architectural firm for a Martian settlement. Right, it's called Noah. This is by let me see, by architectural firm, this Abibo. Right. So if you go to their website, you can read about their proposal. What kind of, how the buildings they plan and how they plan to take care of the waste and take care of the farming and all that, right? Cosmo carries lots of these kind of space news, I guess, which is fitting because the name of the newspaper is Cosmo anyway. This is an example of the proposal for human settlements on other planets. Okay, so let me go back to my slide. Let me see. I think I need to exit. I need to exit the full screen and then go back here, and then I go back. Okay. So that is human settlements, right? But both of these problems are second-tier problems. Once you know where do you want to go and whether we can survive out in space or not, then it becomes a question of how do we get there and how do we live there. So these two are technological problems, right? These are problems of technology, right? So these are basically engineering problems, right? Which is slightly more difficult than this one, than the first tier problems, but not as difficult as an ethical problem, right? So let me just close this one and this one. Okay, the third tier problem is the ethical problem, right? So this is a problem of ethics, and ethics basically we want to know how to do the right thing for the right reason in the right way, and the questions that falls under this, there are three. They can be grouped into three problems. The first one is, should we go out into space, right? Secondly, once we are out there in space, should we remain there, right? Because some people might think, well, we should go to space and then return, right? So to them, going to space is like going for a vacation, right? You go somewhere and then you return. So your home is always Earth, but from time to time, you go for a vacation on Mars, or you go for a vacation on Jupiter or whatever, right? So that's the second question: should we remain? Should we settle? Should we, give birth in space? I mean, should there be space child, right? I.e., those people who were born in space and who will probably die in space, right? So that's the third question. That's the second question. And then the third question is that once we are in space, then should we expand? Should we go forth? Should we just be content with colonizing the solar system? Or should we also go out of the solar system and start colonizing other stars as well, other star systems, right? So this is a question of human colonization of the of the galaxy, right? So these are three problems, and if you look at all three problems, all begins with should we, right? So usually whenever we see a problem that begins with should or ought, kalau if in Malay, then these questions would begin with wajarkah kita pergi ke angkasa lepas, wajarkah kita menghuni angkasa lepas, wajarkah kita menakluki angkasa lepas, right? Whenever you have these kind of questions which begins with should we, ought we, then that is a clue that this is an ethical problem, right? To tackle these three problems, there are two tools that we can use, right? The first one is ethics, right? We have to know, we can use ethical theories, right? As I said, ethics is concerned with doing the right thing, is knowing how, is concerned with action, right? The correct action, the right action for the right reason, done in the right way, right? So ethics is about deciding what is the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do, and doing the right thing lah. Okay, and when we talk about deciding what is right and what is wrong, at least in in Western ethics, right, or in Western moral theory, there are three main ethical theories that can be used to decide what is right and what is wrong. And some of you who have taken ethics might know this, but then I'll just give a brief overview. The first one is what is called utilitarian ethics. And in utilitarian ethics, the right thing, if you want to decide what is the right thing to do, then the question that you ask is whether that particular action produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, right? So utilitarian ethic looks at the consequences of an action, right? For instance, if you were to go to space, what consequences will that bring to humans who are left on Earth and who are in space, right? Will it generate the greatest amount of happiness for people who are left on Earth or for people who are in space, right? If it does generate the greatest amount of happiness for the people who get to go to space, then going to space is the right thing to do, right? So in utilitarian ethics, we try to maximize pleasure and to minimize pain. And the right action is one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, right? So this is one way to decide what is right and what is wrong. You choose the action that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, right? The second ethical theory is what is called duty ethics, right? This is by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, and according to Kant, whether an action is morally good or not depends on not so much the consequences of that action, but on the motive, right? Why you want the if you want to know whether something is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, you must investigate the motive for doing it, the intention. Why do you want to do it, right? And the intention must obey universal moral laws, right? And if the action obeys those moral laws, then these actions these actions are called the categorical imperative, right? So according to Kant, if you want to know whether something is the right thing to do or not, then you should check whether that particular action obeys the categorical imperative, right? So the main distinction between utilitarian ethics and duty ethics is that for utilitarian ethics, we look at the consequences of the action, of our action, whereas for duty ethic, we look at the motive or at the purpose or the intention behind the action, right? And in duty ethics, rights become important, right? You must, a morally good act is one that preserves, that respects the rights of a rational being, right? So the modern concept of human rights derive a lot, owes a lot to duty ethics, right? Immanuel Kant is sometimes thought to be the father of, or at least the father of modern human rights, right? Finally, the third criteria, or the third way to decide whether something is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, is to look at whether that particular action is one that a virtuous person would do, right? So this falls under virtue ethics, and this was proposed by Aristotle, right? So for Aristotle, a morally good thing or a good or a moral action is one that promotes what he calls human flourishing, is what makes you a better human being, right? So if by going to space, we can somehow transform into a better society or better human beings, then according to virtue ethics, then space travel or going to space is something that is morally is morally good. Okay, so these three are basically three criteria that we can use to decide whether going to space is moral, is ethical or not, right? We can either judge it using utilitarian ethics, or we can judge it using duty ethics, or we can judge it using virtue ethics, right? It might be the case that according to utilitarian ethics, out into space is ethical, right? But according to duty ethics, it might be the case that going to space is unethical, right? Or it is not necessary that each of these type of ethics will give the same answers, because each of them have different criteria for deciding what is good and what is bad. Okay, so that's the first one. That's the first tool that we can use to sort of to judge whether going to space is ethical or not, right? To judge them according to these three ethical theories. Okay. The second way is to look at literature, right? And as you know, space travel has been featured prominently in popular culture, right? Not just in television and film, but previously in novels and in books and in short stories, right? And as far as science fiction literature is concerned, whenever we talk about humans in space, it can be divided into two genres, right? The first one is about human travels, about human traveling into outer space, and usually it is about humans traveling either to the to the moon or to the planets, right? Usually, science fiction stories about humans traveling to space is confined to within the solar system, right? Very seldom they go out of the solar system, um, which is interesting. So here, what I've listed here are several literary works or science fiction works on interplanetary travel to the moon, right? The famous these are the not safe well the famous ones, but also the to my mind the most important ones, because these are the first amongst the first science fiction works, right? From the Earth to the Moon by Jules Verne in 1865. So if you note the year, this is at the end of the 19th century. So this was way before humans have sent anything out into space. This was before this this was even before the beginning of astrophysics, right? So what is important here for you? What is important for you to note here is that humans have been thinking about going into space way before before they have the technological capability of going to space, right? So humans have been dreaming of going to space in their literature before they have the scientific and technological know-how to do that, right? And this is quite common in the history of thought, history of science. Humans will speculate, humans will dream about their fantasies and their hopes and their fears through literature, and then somehow those dreams, those speculations in their literature will be the inspiration for scientific and technological progress, right? So that's why it is important for us as someone who is trained in science to also have a healthy appreciation for literature, right? Because sometimes you can get ideas from literature, right? So the first one here is by Jules Verne, From the Earth to the Moon. I think that's so this is a cover. What is interesting here, I'm not sure whether you can see it. As you can see, this is the moon, right? This is this is what is called the projectile train, right? That, according to Jules Verne, will take humankind to the moon. And if you look at this, right, I think if you're physics students, then you know that what projectile is. But if you look at the depiction here, the spaceship is depicted as a train, right? You can see this is the front of the train, and then you have a smokestack with steam coming out, right? And then you have the carriages, right, at the back, right? So so Jules Verne imagined spaceships uh, based on the trains that he sees around him at that time, right? This is at the end of the 19th century, right? So train was the primary mode of transportation. So to his imagination, to Jules Verne imagination, if you can take a train to go from one place on the earth to another, then why can't you take a train to go to the moon? So he called it the projectile train, right? So yeah, it is very interesting how these writers uses what they see around them in creating their stories, right? So that is Jules Verne. And then the second one is this one, On the Moon by Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. This is 30 years after this one. I think if you are a physics student, then Konstantin Tsiolkovsky would be more familiar to you as someone who came up with the rocket equation, right? So if you take classical mechanics, then you learn about the rocket equation, right? But Tsiolkovsky was not only responsible for rocket equation in classical mechanics. He also wrote science fiction, right? And his science fiction works called On the Moon, right? So those are journeys to the moon. Journeys apart from going to the moon, there are also stories about people going to Mars. The famous one is here, Princess from Mars, in 1912 by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is a cover, right? So as you can see, this is the protagonist, right? John Carter or something like that. And this is the Princess of Mars. And funnily enough, Martians look very much like people on Earth. But again, this is an example of how science fiction writers, they project their culture or what they see or their values in the stories that they wrote, right? So in a way, when we study literature, we are studying the record or the impression of the time during which the stories were written, right? So in a way, literature, if studied properly, it is a historical record, right? From by studying literature, you will know how people at that time think about something, right? So that is that. And then the second genre is about contact with extraterrestrials. For this, the aliens can either be a threat. For instance, in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, I think Dr. Kuhn mentioned this. There was a movie, but the movie is so-so, so I suggest that you read the novel, right? This is a cover, right? The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Again, Jules Verne and H.G. Wells are commonly thought to be the father of science fiction, right? These were the first few people who wrote science fiction, right? Before that, there were others, but then Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, are the prominent ones. Okay, and then for extraterrestrial as a savior, aliens who came to the Earth to save us. A good example is this: the film "The Day the Earth Stood Still." Right. You can see here, this is a poster of the film in 1951, From Outer Space, A Warning and Ultimatum, right? When we talk about contact with extraterrestrials, either aliens are depicted as a threat, as someone or as something who is here to destroy us, who came here to destroy us, or as something or someone who came to save us, right? So this is a typical. These are the two types of contact with extraterrestrial literature, right? So I'll just close that. Okay, so we are done with how can we think about this. So the next part, let's see. I need to, okay. The next part is this, is, okay, what are the issues? What are the ethical issues, right, about human presence in space? And I would like to give some historical background, right? Whenever we talk about going into space, we must understand that space is not a place without any law, right? There's a legal framework. There's a treaty, the Outer Space Treaty, that was signed in 1967. This was 10 years after Sputnik, right? That, let me just show you, right? So the Outer Space Treaty lay down principles that govern any activity that we do in space, right? And the Outer Space Treaty is the foundation for international space law, right? So you can see the exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit and the interest of all countries and shall be the province of all mankind, right? So it provides the foundation for international space law, okay? And this was in 1967, right? And then since then, there have been works by lots of people on the question of space ethics. In 1986, this book, Beyond Spaceship Earth, Environmental Ethics and the Solar System, right? So you can see the analogy being drawn here, the Earth as a spaceship, right? So we are traveling through space. So we are inhabitants, we are, we are living on a spaceship in a sense, in a self-contained environment. And as we go, as we explore other parts of the system, then we have to do it responsibly. So this was in 1986. And then there's a 1993 book, Bringing Life to the Stars, and then Engineering Ethics. So this is a book that discusses the risk and the benefit of going to space, right? Previously, there was a space shuttle, and as you know, the space shuttle suffered 2 major accidents. So there's a question of what kind of risk, how high a risk that we are willing to take to go to space, right? And then in 2015, Nobody Owns the Moon, the Ethics of Space Exploration. And then in 2016, the Ethics of Space Exploration. And then in 2020, human enhancements for space missions. Remember I talked earlier about whether or not we can survive in space, about space biology. So there have been proposals that, well, if human beings cannot survive as we are in space, then maybe we should genetically engineer, ourselves so that we can survive long-term space travel, right? So then it raises the question whether we should enhance ourselves so that we can survive in space, right? So this ties in with the issue of genetic engineering and genetic modification and all that, right? And then in 2020, this was last year as well, the value of science in space exploration, right? So these are some major works in the field of space ethics, okay? Just to give you the range of issues that have been discussed, okay? So let me just close this. Okay, so, sorry. Okay, when we talk about space ethics, about ethical problems of human presence in space, let me just go to this one and this one, right? Because this one maybe I can address this in question and answer, right? In outer space, there are several questions that arises when we talk about human presence in space. The first one is why should we go into outer space, right? There are groups who say that, well, we should go into outer space, and there are groups that say that, well, we should not go into outer space at all, and there are groups that say that, well, we should not go to outer space until we have settled certain things, right? So the factors that we have to consider here are the outcomes versus the means, right? If you this was a survey done by the Pew Research Center in 2020. This was last year. One of the questions that was asked was whether how many percent of the population of a particular country says that their government space exploration program has been a positive, has been a good thing for society. And if you look here, Malaysia is listed, And you'll be happy to know that 83% of Malaysians think that the space program, our space program, has been beneficial for us, and only 14% says that it has been a bad thing, right? So this is a issue of perception of how our society perceive space exploration. Should we invest money in space exploration or not? Right? You can find more information about this survey here. And then the second issue is about if we were to invest in space science or in astronomy, astrophysics, space science, then what is the end game? What's the purpose, right? And there's a whole issue about the development of space science in Malaysia that we can go into, but I'll just draw your attention to this, right? Both UKM and UM has been instrumental in developing space science in Malaysia, right? The second factor that we have to consider is the cost, right? The cost of space exploration. This statistic shows the cost of the Mars rover, right? From the very beginning, the Viking. I think Dr. Cohen mentioned Vikings 1 and 2. This was launched in 1975. As you can see, it cost the Americans $7 billion US dollars, right? Perseverance, the one that was just landed on Mars, cost $3 billion, right? And then the rest is 3 billion, 2 billion, 2 billion. So when we talk about sending robots to other planets, the cost is almost always in the billions, right? You are talking about billions of US dollars, right? So we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to spend so much on on these kind of projects, right? So so those are the examples of cost that we have to think about, right? And then once we are in space, the question becomes, what should we do in space, right? So I have divided this into present activities that we are doing now and future activities that we can do, right? Examples of present activities of humans in space, mainly for, the first one is to observe Earth, right? I think many people don't realize that a huge amount of NASA's budget is for Earth observation. It's not so much for space exploration, but mainly to observe Earth for scientific purposes, for economic purposes, and for defensive purposes, right? So space, because sometimes there are certain things that you can only observe from sometimes there are certain things about the Earth that you can only observe from space, right? So that's why Earth observation is important. And then we also use space for satellite communication, right? And then now space tourism, some people go to space because, just because they can pay a certain amount of money and they can go to space to experience microgravity or weightlessness and all this. Space is also used for scientific research and exploration. And this can be divided into two, either for robotic exploration by sending robots, right, like Perseverance and Viking, all this, or by sending humans to space, right? The furthest object that humans have reached since 1957 was the moon, right? So the moon is the farthest location that humans have stepped foot on, right, in space. So these are the things that we are doing in space now. There are future activities that we can do in space. Manufacturing, right? Maybe we can manufacture certain materials, certain advanced materials in space. Geoengineering. This I think Dr. Kuhn mentioned this as well. This is the idea of altering the climate of the Earth, right? To prevent, let's say, climate change or some other disasters, right? And then there have been also proposals to mine in space, right? Especially asteroids. I just want to share this particular statistic. If this statistic shows the value of asteroids based on the mineral and element content, and it is expressed in quintillion US dollars. Quintillion is a number followed by 18 zeros. So this is million, right? So apparently they did based on the data that they have collected, and an asteroid called Davida contains elements and minerals and compounds that is worth 27 quintillion US dollars. 27 followed by 18 zeros, right? So this is the worth of asteroids. So if you look at these numbers, right, you can understand why lots of people are trying to get to space to mine these minerals, right? Because there's plenty of them, and this is only one asteroid, right? And there are hundreds and thousands of asteroids in the solar system. So space mining will be a big thing if once it gets started, then it will be a big thing, right? And finally, human settlements in space, right? About building habitats in space. Okay, so these are examples of things that we may do in space, right? There's also the issue of of space debris, right? Human beings, being humans, we tend to litter, we tend to leave our waste everywhere. So space debris is a problem, right? It's so much a problem that it is the Earth is surrounded by lots of trash, right? Trash consists of debris, orbital debris, from non-functional spacecraft, from mission-related debris, from the leftovers of rockets, right? And the issue here is who should be responsible to clean up the debris, right? So this is just like a problem in Malaysia, right? Not in Malaysia, here on Earth. If you produce trash, right? Country A produces lots of plastic trash, and then they export the plastic trash to other countries, and other countries have to take care of the trash, right? So is that fair? Is that ethical or not, right? So if you look, the countries with the most satellites is the United States, right? So you would think that, well, the United States is responsible for cleaning up all this debris, right? But again, there's no agreement, there's no framework to sort of settle who should take care of this debris. But this is a question of the sustainability of going to space, right? Because if we keep producing space trash, then pretty soon space will be littered by lots of debris that we cannot even get. That will be very difficult for us to put new satellites and new spacecraft in space, right? The next issue is how should we defend Earth from planetary impacts, right? We know that asteroids have hit the Earth in the past. It will hit the Earth in the future. So there's a whole office at NASA called the NASA Planetary Defense Office, whose job is to find, to track, to characterize, and to deflect incoming asteroids, right? So the ethical issue here is that the technology that we use to deflect asteroids can also be used to as a kind of weapon, right? If you can deflect asteroid away from Earth, then you can also deflect asteroid towards Earth, or maybe towards a particular country. So this is an example of how one technology can be used for good and for bad, right? So and the last issue here is once we are in space, once we are outer space, should we subject human beings to the risk of interstellar travel? There are physiological risks and there are psychological risks. Going to space, for instance, going to Mars will take around 6 months, right? Using our current rockets, right? What do you want the astronauts to do within that period of 6 months, right? If they have to live with 5 other astronauts, for instance, then they have to deal with they have to deal with their 5 colleagues for the period of 6 months, right? So it's like having an MCO for 6 months with only 5 people to talk to, right? And there's no escape. So that will put a lot of psychological stress on the astronaut. And should we subject human beings to such a risk? Okay, so those are issues concerning being in outer space. There's also issue of once we have landed on celestial bodies. The first issue is who owns the celestial body, and this issue of establishing claims over resources and territories. And once you have established those claims, how do you defend those claims, right? How do you settle disputes? Because there is no interplanetary or interstellar policemen. There's no interplanetary or interstellar military. There's no interplanetary or interstellar United Nations which can sort of adjudicate, which can settle disputes between competing nations, right, in space. So that's the first issue. The second issue is once we are on the celestial bodies, what we should do, right? And usually the discussion in space ethics will diverge depending on whether the celestial bodies have life or does not have life, right? If we are sure that the celestial body is lifeless, then there are certain protocols that we must follow for exploration and for its use, right? Still, the issue of even for instance, even if we know that the moon is lifeless, does that mean that we can do whatever we like on the to the moon, right? Even if Mars is lifeless now, does that mean that we can transform Mars into a planet that is more suitable for us, right? Those are ethical issues, right? But if the celestial bodies have indigenous life, if there is life, let's say on Mars, right, then the issue becomes of preservation, right? Should we preserve, indigenous life on Mars, right? Even if they're just microbes, right? If we were to discover microbes on Mars, then should we preserve them, right? This is the issue of contamination, right? And this is one of the issue that was it's an old issue since from the very beginning of human space mission, because the issue of contamination is when human beings go to other planets, right? There is a danger of us carrying microorganisms or life from Earth and transferring it to that planet. And when these astronauts return back to Earth, there's also a danger of them bringing back the microorganisms from these planets back to the Earth, right? So this is the plot for the novel Andromeda Strain, if you have heard about it. So the issue of astronauts inadvertently bringing back life from other planets to Earth, and then the alien life sort of take over the Earth and destroying Earth in the process, right? So when we talk about what should we do on a celestial body, usually the discussion takes into account whether the celestial body is lifeless or it contains life, right? If it has indigenous life, then we have a duty to preserve and to prevent contamination. Okay, so that is that. Let me just go because I think I'm. Let's see. Let me just go straight to the fourth point, to the takeaway points. We can address the third point. Why do we need to think about it during Q&A, inshallah? Why is it important for us to talk about space ethics, right? The first thing we have to realize is that outer space exploration is a human endeavor, right? What I mean by this is that the decision whether to go into space or not is not a decision that should only be made by scientists or engineers, because any astronaut or anyone who goes up to space, who settle into space, they are not just going out there as a representative of themselves or of their company or of their country, but they are representing all of mankind, right? So the decision whether or not to go into space, what should we do in space, is something that not only requires input from scientists and engineers, but also from the social scientists, from historians, from philosophers, from theologians, right? From the public, right? So especially when we know that outer space is not a vacuum. It is not a moral vacuum, i.e. you cannot just go into space and do whatever you like, right? So we need an ethics that is global, that takes into account everyone, that is anticipatory, meaning that we have to anticipate, well, if you if I were to do this, then what will happen? If I were to do this, what will happen? Right? In a sense, we cannot wait for something to happen. Only then we want to figure out what are the rules and what are the regulation. Instead, we have to put in place the rules and regulation before we actually go out into space. And then finally, the ethics have to be multidisciplinary. Right? As you can see, when we look at the scientific problems, technological problems, and ethical problems, scientists alone cannot solve all these issues of all these ethical problems of whether we should go and should not go, what we should do, what we should not do. Right? You need input from social scientists, from the humanities as well. Right? So that's the first one. The second one, we have to realize that when when human beings go out into space, we it is part of a long history of us transitioning from being rocketeers, someone who just wants to build rockets to go into space, to what I would call cosmic imperialists. Right? Some of us, or some people, have this dream of conquering planets and expanding the human race and migrating to other planets. So human presence in space, the issue of human presence in space, is part of a broader story of how human beings have changed from being rocketeers to cosmic imperialists. And we like to talk about finding intelligent life out there in the universe, but I think sometimes we have to think whether there is intelligent life here on Earth. Right? I like this particular cartoon by Calvin Hobbes. Sometimes I think the surest sign that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe is that none of it has tried to contact us. Right? We have to look at our history, at how we have, for the past 60 years since man has left the Earth out into space, has our conduct been exemplary or not? Right? Has we become better human beings when we go out into space? Right? And we have to realize that human presence in space will take several generations. Right? This is a project that will take several generations. Maybe our grandchildren or great grandchildren will only be able to make space travel routine. Right? We also have to realize that the human beings that will settle other worlds, or that will settle in outer planet, will not be like us. They might have different values. Right? We today is very short. Human beings today, at least our society today, is very short term. Right? We think about what we want to do tomorrow or next year, but space travel or human presence in space is a project that requires planning in tens of years or even hundreds of years. We have to think in terms of decades and centuries. So unless we start thinking long term, then going to space will just be like a joyride, basically, and not be a sustainable activity for humankind. Right? Some of you might ask, why should we care? Even if why should we start thinking about space ethics? Because who gets to go anyway, right? This does not concern me. I think that by thinking about space ethics, it trains us to think about the global challenges that we are facing. Right? Humankind today is facing lots of global challenges: climate change, overpopulation, hunger, poverty. Right? And thinking about space ethics allows us to figure out what problems are worth tackling and how to best tackle them. And when we talk about ethical, thinking about ethical issues, then what we will usually do is to examine our assumptions, and then we speculate on all the options that we have, and then we weigh the implications, and only then we make our decision. Right? And then thinking about space ethics also allows us to it trains us to deal with those who disagree with us, because we have to realize that in the history of space travel, human space travel, even during the space race, when United States and Soviet Union was racing to get to the moon, not everyone in America agreed that they should be sending people to the moon. Right? For instance, Martin Luther King, the famous activist, he disagreed with the whole idea of sending man to the moon, because to him, with so many problems that we have here on Earth, why should we be wasting billions of US dollars, racing with the Russians, sending man to the moon, right? What does it achieve, right? So we have to realize that in our enthusiasm, in our in our in our in our rush to go into space, not everyone will want to go out to space, right? Like when I show you the Pew Research survey, right? There's that 14% that disagree that the space program has been good for society, right? So we should, but if you want to go to space, then we should go. It should be a collective project, right? It should not be a rich white man's project, right? It should not be something that only certain people can do, right? It should be something. It should be something that all humankind can share in, right? Unfortunately, nowadays when we talk about going to space, most of the proponents of private space companies nowadays, if you look, Elon Musk with his SpaceX, Jeff Bezos with his Blue Origin, Richard Branson with his Virgin Atlantic, and Yuri Milner and Mark Zuckerberg with Breakthrough Starshot. All of them are, they are white, right? They're white. They are rich, extremely rich. Some of them are the richest man on earth, right? And they come from a certain background, from a certain country. So you have to ask. I think we have to ask ourselves, what is this? Are these people the kinds of people that we want to lead our space, our human adventure into space, right? If you look at SpaceX by Elon Musk, right, he did lots of trial for his rocket, right, for his Falcon rocket. Have you ever wondered why can he afford to fail so much? Because building a rocket is not cheap, right? You have to, it can easily go into the millions or even to the billions, right? But if you look at the launches that Elon Musk did, he suffered a lot of failures, right? And if it should make us wonder, how can he afford to fail so much? Because each time his rocket failed, he would have wasted maybe millions of US dollars, right? So that tells you two things. One, it tells you that he's very rich. Two, it tells you that the people who is leading our space adventure nowadays are those who have so much money that they can afford to fail many times, right? They fail and then they try again. They fail and they try again. I think if NASA were to suffer the same failure rate as Elon Musk with his SpaceX, I think NASA would have been censored or would have been criticized long time ago, right? So those are the things that we should think about. How can these companies afford to to fail so frequent and learn from them, right? Not learn from them. It does make you wonder, right? Space travel is expensive, and to fail so much, to lose money so much, right? If you want to put it in business terms, it does make you wonder, right? So that is so I think I will end there, right? I just want to draw attention to some. I've listed here several books that I recommend that you look out for, or if you're interested in this, then these are the books that you can look into. It is a mixture of science fiction, so these two are science fiction. The nice thing about these two books, because they've been published a long time ago, so it is open source, right? So it has its copyright has lapsed, so you can just go to the internet and find them. In fact, you just click this button here, and then you're brought to the Wikipedia link, and there's a link to the stories, to the text, right? This is by Carl Sagan. If you want to know about, if you want a good book that sort of covers everything about what human beings can and should do in space, then you can never go wrong with pale blue dot, right? Which refers to an image taken by the spacecraft Voyager, right? An image of the Earth, which is this one here, right? So if you look at this image, Earth is here, right? This dot there, right? So this image is supposed to make us think of how fragile we are on Earth, right? And then these other books are about aliens, like astrobiology, right? So I think I'll stop here, and then I look forward to your question. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Muhammad Aimran. All right. Let's move on to the question and answers. So we have a few questions
Let me
here,
just,
and our first question would be: human is an intelligent species that has caused so much destruction on our home planet. To what extent our faith system and moral values acknowledge our detrimental impacts to Earth and other species? Yeah, here's the question, Doctor.
to what extent our faith and moral values acknowledge our detrimental impacts to Earth and the species sharing the planet, saving Earth or next Earth? This is a good question. The if we, the ethical theories. Remember the ethical theories that I've listed just now: the utilitarian ethics, the duty, and then the virtue ethics. Those are the framework. Those are the criteria that we can use to judge whether our action is moral or immoral. But these theories are what is called rational theories, i.e., you philosophize about it. I did not include, ethical theories that are based on religion, right? As far as religion such as Judaism or Christianity or Islam even speaks about our duties as human beings to the planet, to the environment. Uh, all religions emphasize the fact that the earth is something that does not belong to us, that we are supposed to take care of it, that it is a trust, right? It is something that will be held accountable for, right? So why I say that this question is interesting, because there are some space ethicists that begin to question whether the ethical theories that we have developed here on Earth, right, utilitarian ethics, duty ethics, and virtue ethics, whether they are suited for for space, for moral problems that arise in outer space. Maybe we have to come up with a new ethics when we come to when we talk about what is right and what is wrong to do in outer space. The point is that the outer space treaty, the outer space that I showed earlier, that is actually based on that space treaty is developed based on laws that have established at sea, right? So when you are a sailor, when you are at sea, there is a certain you know uh, from shore which belongs to country, but there are also international waters which is governed by international body, right? So some people have tried to apply a similar model when talking about regulation in space, right? Maybe we should consider outer space as like the outer space area as a province of all mankind. It means that it is, in a way, it's like international. It belongs to everyone, right? So celestial bodies and outer space belongs to everyone. But whether we like it or not, we my personal view is that some religions are well suited to guide us as we venture out into outer space, right? Because all religions are very clear insofar as they say that we should not destroy the environment. So if we assume that space is an environment that we should take care of, then the same rules apply. Okay, but yeah, it is a good question, that one.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Muhammad Imran. Okay, we are short in time, so let's move on to the next question. Just a short one. Is
Yeah.
Okay, there's a shorter question here on airmate, which is there any discussion among countries on ways to reduce the trash surrounding the Earth in space?
The discussion, yes. Usually, this is discussed under the United States Office for Space Affairs, right? UNOSA. Um, they released a white paper, I think it was last year, which sort of listed three main problems or three main issues when it comes to humans in space. The first one is light pollution, right? Because light pollution prevents normal people from appreciating the night sky. And if you cannot appreciate the night sky, then you won't care about it. So that's the first issue. The second issue is about space debris, right? Space debris. Who should take care of space debris? And the third issue is of planetary defense, right? How should we defend our planet from impact? So those are the three issues that the United Nations is paying attention to, right? Space debris, light pollution, and planetary defense, right?
All right. Thank you once again, Mr. Muhammad Imran, for the very good session just now, and for answering the question. And thank you again to the participants for the questions just now, Sophia and Prof. Siti. All right.
Electricity. Electricity.
Yeah, the good question just now was from Prof. Siti. All right. Without further ado,
Long time
thank
also.
you. Thank you again, once again, to our speaker. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you all to stay tuned as we will now commence our closing ceremony to conclude our 2-day virtual conference. Therefore, I would like to invite the president of Persatuan Fiziks Universiti Malaya, Brother Jasman Faiz, to give the closing speech and thus conclude our event today.
Hello, Tess. Can you see my screen?
No.
Oh, can you re-invite me, actually? Re-invite me on stage. Thank you. Wait, never mind. Okay, can you see me now? Okay. Greetings, everyone. Assalamualaikum, and greetings, everyone, to the speakers, professors, and doctors, lecturers, organizing team, and the audience. Thank you for inviting me to give this closing speech for this event. First of all, I would like to thank you, Sir Amran, for such inspiring session with you. Even though we are at the mercy of time, I would love to listen to a lot more of your wisdom. But I believe you are a good friend of Dr. Imran, and hopefully one day we can meet again, maybe in UM. But regardless of that, I would like to thank our speaker, Dr. Huan, Dr. Kuhan, Dr. Amran, and to the audience for spending the time with us, even in the weekend where usually people, it's a Sunday morning, people spend time and relax during this time. But you guys are here hungry for knowledge. I hope everyone is motivated enough during the 3 session, provided the respective speakers and the organizers are here. Also, I believe this is the first time UM Physics Association has done a virtual conference. Even if that doesn't sound hard enough for you guys, the topic Next Earth is actually a difficult topic, as we all know, because if I remember correctly, there's not a lot of experts in Malaysia. Well, hats off also to the organizer because they successfully tackled the challenge of planning this. I hope this will not be the last time performed to such event. And lastly, I would like to keep it short. I guess we are at the mercy of time also. So I would like to give a closing quote by Carl Sagan from his book titled Cosmos, which is resoundingly synonymous with the theme of this event. Exploration is in our nature. We began as wanderers, and we are wanderers still. We have lingered long enough on the shores of the cosmic ocean, and we are ready at last to set sail for the stars. Well, that's all for me. Thank you. Now I pass my stage to Irfan. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, Brother Jasmine, for the very good quote just now from Carl Sagan. Okay, representing the committee of virtual conference, I would like to thank everyone for joining our event today and yesterday. And that marks the end of our event for today. For more exciting future events, don't forget to follow Perfume on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. There will be more interesting events in the future. So see you guys in the future events and have a great day. Thank you, everyone. And please don't forget to sign in your attendance for your CE certification